Luca lived in the tranquility of a small mountain village. His life, marked by the loss of his wife, had been reduced to a repetitive cycle of work and toil. He had 3 daughters, Sofia, Giulia, and Chiara, whom he loved more than anything else. Sofia, the eldest, was a bright and strong girl with the dream of becoming a scientist. Giulia, the second, was an artist at heart, always intent on drawing and painting. Chiara, the youngest, was still full of innocence and dreamed of working with animals. After his wife's death, Luca had built a life of love and protection around them. But with the recent loss of his job at a small company in the village, the future seemed uncertain. Economic resources were increasingly limited, and every day brought with it new worries. Despite everything, his daughters tried to keep smiling, but Luca felt the growing weight of their situation. Before continuing, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. One day, while wandering the deserted streets of the village, desperately trying to escape his thoughts, he noticed a strange wooden box abandoned near a dumpster. The box was old, with decorative carvings and a worn look. What caught his attention the most was the fact that it seemed out of place. Who would leave something so precious in that place? Luca bent down and picked up the box. It was light, yet it seemed to contain something important. He felt driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain. When he got home, he sat down at the kitchen table with the box in front of him, looking at it for a long moment. There was something disturbing and fascinating about it at the same time. Finally, he opened the box. Inside, he found not money, as he had briefly hoped, but something far more enigmatic, a series of letters, carefully stacked. Each letter was sealed and bore a name, Marta. They seemed to be personal letters, written with care and passion. Luca stood there, staring at the envelopes, feeling a sudden tension. Who was Marta, and why would someone abandon these letters in such a squalid place? He took the first letter. The paper was yellowed by time, but the handwriting, though shaky, was still legible. Luca delicately opened the envelope and began to read. The letter spoke of regrets, bad choices, and a love that seemed to have been lost forever. Every word was soaked in pain and melancholy. It was as if the person who had written those lines was desperately trying to reconcile himself with a past that tormented him. Luca couldn't stop reading. Each letter told a different story, but they all converged into a single plot, that of a love that was unrequited or interrupted by mysterious circumstances. Marta seemed to have been the love of Ron's life, the author of the letters, and these missives were the only way he could express his pain. Over the next few weeks, Luca read each letter. Some had been written many years ago, while others were more recent. What struck him most was that the last letters seemed to indicate an imminent meeting between Ron and Marta. In one of the most recent letters, Ron spoke of a meeting, a specific place, and an approaching date. It was as if the author had hoped for a decisive meeting, a last attempt to close the circle of that tormented relationship. One day, Luca found something more than a simple letter. In one of the envelopes, hidden between the folds of the paper, there was an old train ticket, dated years before. The ticket was for a train that would take Ron to a small town by the sea, where, according to the writing, he was supposed to meet Marta. Luca could not understand why that box had been abandoned. What had happened? Had the meeting taken place? And above all, who was Ron? Maybe it was a diminutive of his name? Intrigued and increasingly emotionally involved in the story, Luca decided to investigate. He decided to leave for that seaside town where the meeting was supposed to take place. Maybe, he thought, he would find some trace of Marta or Ron. When he arrived in the small town, he began asking around. No one seemed to remember a similar story. The years had passed, and the people he turned to seemed confused, as if that name no longer meant anything. After days of fruitless searching, Luca was about to give up when an elderly bookseller approached him. "Marta, you say?" "Yes, I knew a woman with that name. She was a charming person, very reserved, but with an air of sadness that she always carried with her," the man said, remembering. Luca suddenly felt close to an answer, but the truth he discovered left him speechless. Marta, as revealed by the bookseller, had never existed as the romantic figure in the letters. She was a real person, of course, but what Luca had discovered was only part of the story. Ron, the author of the letters, had never known Marta as a love. He was obsessed with her, perhaps even in love in a platonic way, but the image he had built of her in the letters was a product of his imagination, a refuge from the loneliness that had tormented him for years. Back home, Luca reread all the letters with this new awareness. The words that once seemed full of love now seemed like a cry of desperation. It was as if Ron had spent his entire life chasing something he could never have. The letters had never been sent to Marta. They were a dialogue with himself, an attempt to make peace with his life. As he reflected on all this, Luca realized how much the story had touched him. He himself, in a way, had lived a similar life, trying to keep the pain of losing his wife at bay, pretending to be strong for the sake of his daughters, but never really facing his own pain. The letters had forced him to look inside himself, to recognize that he too had been putting off his emotions, just as Ron had done with Marta. It was that night that Luca made a decision. Speaking openly with his daughters, he decided to no longer hide the pain he felt. His words flowed with difficulty, but he finally managed to share what he had kept hidden for so long. Sofia, Julia, and Chiara listened to him in silence, and when he finished, they hugged him, reassuring him that, despite everything, they would remain united. Those letters, even though they were written to a woman who didn't really exist, had found an addressee in Luca, and thanks to them, he was able to make peace with his past, to look forward with hope, and above all, to understand that the value of life is not in trying to avoid pain, but in facing it, accepting it, and finally, transforming it into strength. Did you like this story? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching the video till the end, and see you next story.